City. Now, having heard all that, let's hear the proverb.
Right. And it isn't just a proverb. The proverb is a proverb, but the proverb is being read. That flip thing that you've been flipping. Let me flip also. Okay?
Flip it.
Yes.
The Z Flip 4.
Yes, this is the Galaxy Tab S8 Ultra. Now, I'm looking at this delightful clear screen, as clear as daylight. Well, that is, of course, when you don't have clouds and the sun is up and shining.
Those things.
Right, but the proverb is from Western Sahara. Okay? If you are not willing to look, operate word look, stupid, nothing great is ever going to happen to you.
If you are not willing to look stupid, nothing great is ever going to happen to you.
Yes, not be, look.
Look stupid.
Yes, appear like you've zoomed and you have no idea what's going on, that sort of thing. Yes.
If you're not planning to look stupid, bring it to the
Then you're
context
clearly
of this
not planning to actually be successful in the things that you do.
Okay.
There are moments when it is required for you to look clueless, and it's allowed. Yes.
When you do things with a plan.
Yes. Yes, when you do things with a plan.
With a plan. Not just like that. Humble.
As we said, not anyhowly.
Not anyhowly.
Yes.
It's called
Things with a
muddling
plan.
through.
Yes.
Muddling through.
Yes. So we are saying that because we've got two planners in the building. And one of them is Tom Odongo. He's an urban expert and a fellow with the Kenya Institute of Planners. The other one is Patrick Adolwa, who is a planner and an urban specialist. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Asanteni sana for joining us. Thank you for planning to be with us and actualizing it.
Implementing the plan.
Implementing the plan.
We had a vision to be here.
Hey, see now. This discipline of planning, what is it? I mean, there are people who actually go to study planning. Plan what? Let's start with you, Tom. Who is a planner?
It's complex. Let me put this into context.
Yes.
Planning came initially as a response to challenges that came with urbanization in the European countries. And it came as a trade from public health initially. Then it started now to organize cities in terms of form. And there is a correlation between urban form and actually the quality or standard of living that people would have in a city. Then that was basically mainly architecture based. Then it started developing itself as a distinct science body of knowledge that look at things more differently. And now the kind of planning we do have now, which I call urban planning, is trying to see how cities can develop in a sustainable way. And sustainability imperatives will be different depending on where you are. If you are in Africa, where the context of urban development is different, like the urban development taking place in the context of high levels of poverty, high unemployment, slow economic growth, then what would be the imperative? The imperative is that people must have access to affordable housing. People must have access to basic services like water. People must have access to mobility. People must have access to healthcare and all those facilities. So what does planning do? Planning then addresses the question of how can these cities, in the context that they are evolving, work, operate, and function as sustainable cities. And that question is still a question in Africa, though in other areas they have already dealt with sustainability. Here we are still struggling with sustainability because sustainability is not just a question of how we plan cities, but how our economy transforms to include citizens in the vanguard of development.
I've heard you mention very many things. So planning is not just about architecture.
Yeah.
Planning is not about design.
Yeah.
It's very many things.
Yeah.
So what is it that somebody who's studying planning, then what do they study?
Yeah.
Do you draw architectural drawings? Do you draw, are you a surveyor? What are you? Are you a public health?
Yeah.
Are you civil? Exactly. What are you?
Planning borrow from different body of sciences. One is it borrows from economics, it borrows from sociology, it borrows from geography, it borrows from philosophy. Actually, we do in terms of design. Actually, we go into environmental philosophy to translate how people should interact with space. And so, like I said, these are the bodies of sciences that that planning has built itself on. And so when you study planning, there are two things that planning does. Planning is about relationship in a very, very complex space. We see space not as a very passive thing. We see space, urban space, as a very, very complex entity where there is competition, conflicts, and there are contestations. And those contestations is about the powers that place there. And what we are looking at is in an urban space is a place where people with unequal socioeconomic power plays. There is people with lower socioeconomic power. There are people with higher economic power.
Yeah.
What does planning does? Planning is a way of mediating so that you are able to make sure that urban development generates social justice, urban development protects environment, urban development promote development that subscribe to principles of sustainability. So in general, some people can summarize it this way. It's about relationship on space. Yeah.
It's a relationship on space.
Yes.
Now when you say on space, I go to space. I'm wondering. Okay.
Yeah.
I think there. So now, when we're talking about in the current space that we're operating in, when we're talking about sustainable cities, and we're talking about development, especially on this side of the world, where does planning play a role here? Many would argue, if we look around Nairobi, and if we can just jump right into that, that there was an original plan for the city. And what's happening today is that we're just plugging into the plan or not following the plan. So which one, from your point of view, where are we going with this city? Because it looks like the way the city is evolving today, that we are looking at current interventions that are being placed on an ancient plan and that it cannot work. Am I somewhere?
Let me take my turn to speak to planning, and I have to take you a little bit back because we borrow our traditions of planning from the British system of planning, and England is actually the cradle of modern day town planning. And as Tom said, it actually comes from the Industrial Revolution. It comes from the Industrial Revolution. Something happens, the world changes, there's a manufacturing juggernaut, populations move into urban places, unsanitary conditions, roads that don't work, tenements instead of housing, breakdown in law and order, in public health. You have things like bubonic plague, and the whole gamut of things gone wrong. So planning comes in to structure, to order, to give structure to things, to eliminate all those things, to systematize things, okay? And now you can see where we are going with this with regard to Nairobi, because Nairobi is an evolution of that system, because the British come here via the railway. You know the colonization of Kenya, the Berlin Conference in 1885, the British East African Company, the building of the railway from 1895. All those settlers, engineers, MacDonald, Williamson, all those people building up to Nairobi, establishing all these urban systems. So when they establish this urban system, they provide some rudimentary plans. They're just local plans which say that's the railway station, that's a residential camp, that's the administrator's office, and it's a simple thing. Then somewhere in 1948, something happens very phenomenal, which is the first major plan for Nairobi, and it structures Nairobi in a certain way. And for Nairobi, it was like a segregated plan, where Europeans live, where Indians live. And I'm making this very brief because the history is huge. So you have an apartheid sort of plan, which has Karen, which has Ngara for Indians, which has the African Quarter in Mudurwa, whatever, Makongeni, and so on and so forth. But it's a very good structure in terms of physical structure. It works. It's got proper neighborhoods. It's got proper systems. It's self-contained neighborhoods with schools, community amenities, and so on and so forth. The right sizes of roads, the right population densities. And then independence happens, and another, phenomenon happens. Everybody comes to the city. So if you have this structure that in 1950 maybe is just incubating 50,000 people, then one morning we say 1963 tumepata uhuru, freedom has come. Freedom has come. And everyone comes to the city. And I'm making, this is a very simplified, even if you like, simplistic version of it, but it paints the picture.
Yes, it does.
So everybody comes to the city, unfettered. You arrive, unannounced. No one has plans for you. No one has budget.
And no one is stopping you from coming.
And no one is stopping you from coming. I mean, this country is independent.
No kipande.
No kipande. You do not need a permit to come to Nairobi. Njoni. Come one, come all. Okay? So, you have a systems overload. Okay? Yeah. So now you have this school that is designed for a neighborhood. They are planning standards so that every neighborhood, at 5,000, a neighborhood needs a school and other community facilities. Now this neighborhood has to contend with a population of 15,000 people. You can imagine. It's systems overload. So dysfunction sets in. But at the same time, you have a colonial system that understood urbanization better because they had been in this process. Europe has been in the urbanization process for centuries. Towns like Stockholm have been here for 1,000 years. So they understand, they've been in that urban space for centuries, millennia, if you like. So they understand certain things. They have the urban culture ingrained in them. It's not something they have to learn. So here are Kenyans, 1963, Uhuru has come, everybody takes over power. Young people like CT become permanent secretaries and they think they know. But because they are Kenyans, they have to do what they have to do.
Job, yes.
But it doesn't mean that we have the knowledge and we have the skills. We find ourselves in a situation where we have to do what we have to do. Many times we did not know. So if we had a road that was working, if we had a water system that was functioning, if we had a sewer system that was functional, of course it was functioning because it was good to function. And it was designed for a certain carrying capacity. And then bang, there's an overload. And then there are all these people who do not know how to run municipal systems, planning systems, or even urban management. And they think they're doing well. In 1965, I grew up in town, so my father worked for a municipality, so I grew up in an urban system. And my father was a municipal worker in the social hall. So I grew up in the municipality understanding municipal systems. Okay?
Yeah.
The town hall was a place I went to when I wanted to go and tell my father the school fees. We've been told to come for school fees. So I went to the town hall. That's where my father was. So I understood. Now, in 65, in 66, in 67, in 68, in 69, the systems are falling apart. And people don't understand why it is falling apart. They think, hiya, these things were supposed to be permanent. The word is, but they did not understand that there was required a maintenance regime. Okay? There was required systems, expansion and so on and so forth. We forgot about these things. And then one morning, whatever it is,
opened.
The explosion came. And hence, Ndu's question, why do we find ourselves in that space? And Nairobi suffered most because Nairobi became a primate city, which means that's the city to which everybody went to the exclusion of other cities. But it had to do with the political economy of the day. It had to do with the governance of the day. And it's part of the reason why devolution became an issue at some point in the future. Because everything was about Nairobi. So Nairobi attracted all the resources of Kenya, including human resources. Okay? And when everybody came to Nairobi, I can tell you, in 1,000 years, Stockholm has only attracted 1 million people. In 125 years, Nairobi has attracted 4 million people. Now, that explains to you where
The chaos
is. Yeah.
So we inherited a plan that was built for, of course, a smaller population of people, right? And it had all those segregations of, the whites are living on this side, the Indians are living on this side, you Africans come and stay here. Then independence comes, and of course,
like the way you put it.
these Africans.
African said what?
Africans said what?
What? I'm coming.
So everybody's all over. At any point, did we update then the plan? After we realized, oh my goodness, this thing is collapsing, did we update the plan, and have we been updating this plan?
Yes. 71.
Yeah. The okay, just to add to what Patrick has said, the 1948 was a containment policy. It was not a development promotion plan. It was a development containment plan. Meaning that they were minimizing development to only what was serving the elite, the white elite needs. And an African migration to the city had to be based on a purpose. Either he has work, but family formation was not allowed in Nairobi, in the city. That's why you have houses which were rentals are based on bed space, because they were not supposed to have families.
Is that why all those estates were essentially bachelor quarters?
Yes.
You're meant to come by yourself.
Rent. I mean, tenure is based on bed space. So that's how you come in. You're not supposed to form family. So the transition from a containment to pro-growth, how did Kenya respond to this with regard to Nairobi? They expanded the boundaries
of the city.
The ring.
Yes, almost by 2/3. After expanding the population of the boundaries of the city, then the first thing that they did is to approach the World Bank for water. Water was the main problem that they had in Nairobi. And the World Bank then requested that on what basis are we going to fund water? And so that became the basis for which what we call Metropolitan Growth Strategy of 1971 was actually evolved. It was done in the basis that the World Bank they required a framework within which any funding for water project had to be, and that's what actually funded the Ndakaini. Now, when you expand the urban territorially, it means that you are supposed to invest in infrastructure expansion. It means that you have to put a huge public investment to be able to create new spaces for growth. So that part, the 1971 Metropolitan Growth Strategy was never linked to any budgetary process, except the funds that came for water.
The World Bank fund to Ndakaini to build a dam.
To build a dam. Okay. That is the only activities that came in. However, in recent times, some of the bypasses that have been built recently were actually part of the 1971.
Like the southern, eastern.
Yes. They were part of that plan.
So these bypasses we are seeing here were planned in the 70s?
In the 70s. Yeah. They were planned in the 70s.
As part of the expanded Metropolitan.
The Metropolitan area. The plan projected how the city will grow. Some of this did not happen. For example, the corridor to Thika was supposed to be an urban coalescence where Thika and Nairobi would somehow emerge, and Thika functions as the industrial location for Nairobi, and this did not occur. What happened, therefore, is Nairobi decided to move eastwards. And then at some particular point, government then decided in 1973, how do we increase the supply of serviced land, because more and more people are coming who cannot afford to pay for water services, to buy, to afford housing. So they came up with site and services schemes. And government purchased over 4,000 acres of land in the eastern part of the city. And this is where we now have the Buruburu, the Dandoras, all those things. Until that, and up to now, the major public investment in supply of urban land in the history of Nairobi is in 1973 up to around 85. Beyond that, government resigned again into smaller projects, and hence the situation you have. Now what you have is that land buying companies came in, and land buying companies came in form of market responding to demand for cheaper land in the periphery of the cities.
I think I want to help you somewhere. So you asked again that question. So in 1971, something happens. In 1973, another thing happens. Okay? And the basis for this whole plan is water. And then nothing else. So you can imagine the capital city of Kenya going to the United Nations asking for support. It was the World Bank asking for support and only getting a little support. And then what happens in the next 30 years is you do not have the detailed plans, you do not have the resources to do any meaningful housing development. And that is why you have the Eastlands remaining virtually the way it was in 1960, except for the intervention that is Buruburu. Okay? And that is why the eastern part, the Eastlands, is still a redevelopment area, or a development area if you like. But you can imagine, if you have a plan in 1971, and it takes you 30 years to implement it, that is the problem that we have as a nation. We do plans, but we don't execute them. Okay?
Across board.
I mean, it's a governance thing, it's a leadership thing.
But I also hear something about the plan thing. There's no financial component attached to the plan.
For the longest time, if you asked for a plan to be funded, people would look at you and say, excuse me? What did you say? Because people want to have towns, people want to have good urban systems, but people, even the most educated people, find it difficult to justify funding urbanization, funding urban infrastructure, funding urban governance, funding...
No, Patrick, we have to ask why. Why do they find it difficult? What is so difficult about it?
I mean, it's a paradox. Let me tell you, at some point, we used to go to meetings when Tom and I worked at City Hall. And during those days, and it's not too long ago, 2001, what's the money that we used to get for Latif? How many millions?
No, explain Latif, because
local authority transfer fund. Okay? In local government, we used to have something called local authority transfer fund. Okay? So the Ministry of Local Government would allocate funds to various local authorities. And behold, Nairobi those days used to brag that it accounted for 60% of the GDP. But how much money would they give us?
I think 1.5 billion. And
to do what?
Per annum. Yes, but to do what?
It's for projects.
That's basically
it's everything. It's everything.
That's the money. It's like
recurrent,
the current,
it's projects.
It's like everything. The current devolved money.
Yes.
It's the current.
That was the amount of money that the goose used to get for laying its eggs. But because it was always a hard sell to go to Parliament and speak about the need for Nairobi to receive proper financing. And people couldn't see.
Okay, let's take a break, Patrick. Let's take a break. We'll ask why. Patrick Adolo is a planner and urban specialist. He's here alongside Tom Odongo, who's an urban expert as well, and a fellow of the Kenya Institute of Planners. We are talking about urban planning. Does it exist? Do we have such things in this country or not? Time for us to take this break at 25 to 10. Let's first of all see whether, as planned, those roads that should be bringing people to the city center are actually working or not.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.
Urban planners Patrick Adolwa and Tom Odongo. We are talking about having urban plans in place. I just want to ask this question. So we're talking about not financing plans, but we've had planning departments in these urban areas. So let's talk about the cities. Initially, the city of Nairobi, city of Mombasa, city of Nakuru, and then the towns and municipalities.
City of Kisumu.
Actually, before we come to Nakuru.
Before you even start,
You don't want to have stone throwing here. If you don't call Kisumu City, you'll be in a lot of trouble.
Actually, in my head, I was saying Kisumu. Sorry.
watch a coco.
So there were planning departments.
Yep.
There have been planning departments in these urban areas all along, haven't there been? So what have the departments been doing? What's the job of the urban planner?
I remember I started Department of Planning in Nakuru. And if we had statistics and we indicate how much allocations are done to various departments, at the bottom of
The allocation.
would actually be planning departments. I'll tell you that. And then along the way, one of the things that begin to interfere with the focus on planning is two things. One is revenue. Planning has been transformed into a revenue center predominantly.
How exactly?
Because permissions, enforcement, all these things are organized around mobilizing revenue. Okay? Initially, planning was not linked to programs and projects. Initially, for a long time. Because of lack of funding, planning disintegrated into a regulatory operation that simply was now focusing on regulating private initiative
And enforcing.
Yeah. And of course, in a way that is not organized in a democratic way.
Very adversarial.
So what does that one happen? Reaction is that this is a repressive system. And people mobilize resistance to that kind of system. Along the way, planning has developed into something that is linked to programs, focusing on service delivery and also regulatory. Regulatory is predominantly statutory, but most of innovations in planning approaches are actually linking planning to addressing developmental issues and also service delivery. And I can tell you that I think Nairobi, for example, planning department became one of the highest, probably the most funded, but not from county or council's appropriation, but from donors. Because it started now to refocus on providing solutions to urban development. And that is really the place for planning. The place for planning is not to control private initiatives, but because you can donate, this area of controlling private initiatives can be donated to citizens, because citizens can exercise self-control. Yeah, you can improve governance in such a way that you share information to the extent that people understand what is expected of them at every location, and then you will not have to exercise a lot of resources use a lot of resources on enforcement. And then again, partnerships begin to evolve within the planning space, where even the things like housing developments are evolving, where planning begin to structure areas where you partner with the private sector, leveraging on resources you have. If you have land, you leverage land to get private investment into developing housing, because government is not funding you. You're not going to be funded by government to solve this problem. There's a problem, because housing is very important, because through housing you can deliver a lot of services to households. And so it is very, very critical there. The other thing that has happened also is some other arguments that has come, of course, to do with systemic failure in development control. This area where there was emphasis has actually shown more failure than where we are moving to.
But let me interject before you come to that, so that we comprehensively wrap up. What is the Department of Planning? Okay? So the Department of Planning is the think tank of the city. Okay? It is where the strategies are built.
Should emanate
from. Okay? But does that happen? It's another question.
Patrick, I have to pause there. When you say planning, I'm thinking, what's the difference? I mean, before you go on, the people I'm talking are physical planners. Now you are urban planners.
Yes.
So when we talk planning, are we including both groups, or are they the same thing?
They are one and the same. In fact, that is one of our dilemmas. So the term planning can be town planning, urban planner, physical planning, land use planner. In some countries like Britain, environmental planner. So that whole space is the space of urban planning.
Please carry on.
Okay? And in this country, we do have problems with nomenclature, and sometimes we speak about it, until the cocks come home to crow. But the point about planning is that the notion that you should have a planning department is that in a complex urban system, such as Nairobi or any other, you do need a unit that thinks about how to manage that territorial space. Okay, that geographic space, and it organizes plans, which plans can include maps, diagrams, charts, okay, strategies. So those are the ones that are called physical plans, because they relate to physical spaces. But there is planning beyond the physical, and therefore that Department of Planning is supposed to be the center where the thinking takes place, where all the scenarios are built about what should happen in the city across multiple disciplines. And that is where the future of the city within the territorial jurisdiction of the city is supposed to be determined. So that is where all the thinking about the city happens. What activities happen on land? What's the road network supposed to be? And all other plans, whether they're engineering interventions, environmental interventions, whether they're investments in the economy, are supposed to take their cue from the plan that is authored in the Department of Planning. And it can do that with consultants, with anybody else. It doesn't necessarily have to be done internally. But the organization has to be there. There has to be a unit that organizes all those activities to happen. That's the role and function of the planning department.
Now, Patrick and Tom, the two of you are very senior in this discipline. Tom, you've served as town clerk. Patrick, you've served as even director of planning, and you've risen to all these high levels. When you're telling us should.
Who should? And you guys are the ones at the helm of these.
Well, good question. The point is, we're not speaking about ourselves. We're speaking about systems. We are speaking about that which ought to happen, to be in place by law.
And we are asking, why didn't it happen?
And that which is mandated, why doesn't it happen? There are many reasons why it doesn't happen. Sometimes it is that we do not get the right governance for these places. And I want to use the word governance because...
By governance, do you mean political governance, or do you mean...
the whole lot. But yes, you can begin by saying it's what you put in that you get, that comes out, okay? If you put in quality, you get a quality product. If you don't put in quality, then you also get a product that is commensurate. Okay. And this is not to cast aspersions. This is just to say that in the urban system, in the historical urban system, the way governance was done was in such a way that Tom was speaking to. It was always difficult to get the right people to run the complex systems.
Okay, Patrick, I want to help you there. Sorry.
No, it's all right.
Sorry.
I think the way you two are helping each other is good.
Yeah.
Okay, now Tom is here to help him.
It is important to understand that urban planning is a governance tool, and the efficacy of planning is going to depend on the governance structure that is created through which you are going to exercise that function. In the old system where we had the local government system, the argument was that we have weak institutional systems that were open to external interferences. And this is one of the things. Then the second one was that Kenya approached planning of development sectorally. So which means that you have a lot of fragmentation that was taking place. So it was difficult for one to create a system that could allow for planning to organize cities. So devolution came as a correction, isn't it? Mm-hmm. And the devolution came as a correction in two ways. One, devolution introduces an element of territorial approach in what is sectorally structured approach to planning generally. And then the idea of territorial is that when you are forming a strategy, a national strategy, to respond to issues that are to do with urban development, you must then think in terms of territory and spatial inclusion. Now, I believe that we are still on, that is still a work in progress, because the structure, the sectoral approach to planning is very difficult to dismantle. And without dismantling it to bring territorial approach, we will still going to have a lot of fragmentation and overlaps. And then the governance, the kind of governance that come out of that is very, very complicated in terms of intergovernmental relations around it.
And I want to help you.
Yes,
here.
yes.
Oh, wow.
So we're saying, what we're essentially saying.
Help going on.
No. It's just part and parcel of the same dialogue.
Yeah.
We're saying, you see, it's one thing to speak about planning. It's totally another to institutionalize planning, to make it a culture. Okay? I mean, people like to say they want to do planning, but when you go to the municipalities, like in the old system, the municipalities did not even have town planning departments. In fact, it was only in Nairobi. Nakuru, you installed one.
Yes.
When I left Nairobi, I went to Kisumu, I installed one, and then there was Mombasa.
Yes.
But virtually beyond those three municipalities, there was no other municipality that had a fully fledged town planning department. And the mayors were reluctant, and the clerks were reluctant to see planning beyond development control. Okay? And they wouldn't build the systems.
Patrick, Tom, we know where we are. We're in a spot of bother. That one we've gotten. We have devolution.
Yes.
It's clear. It's not theory.
Yes.
The things that you're talking about
Yes.
and the mess that we are currently in,
Yes.
how does planning help with all these things that you're saying to ensure that devolution actually works, that everything that has to do with devolution functions from a planning perspective? This governor of Nairobi mentioned something about boroughs.
Yes.
Okay?
Yep.
In my mind, that is now devolving devolution further.
Yes.
How do you people come in and how does it actually work?
Yeah, I think that's a very good thinking that somebody is thinking about decentralized. What was perceived under this is something that has been Nairobi did a plan in what we call Nairobi
New plan.
Integrated Urban Development Master Plan, new plan. New plan actually discovered that Nairobi has developed as a polycentric city, means a city with multiple
Several
several
centers.
centers. Okay, polycentric city. And how did this one, how then do you respond to that? In all over the world, polycentric cities are found to be actually more efficient. Yeah? Because they allow, they completely restructure mobility patterns in the city. And they become environmentally, even in terms of climate change, they become much more sustainable. But when you
What does that mean? It means that these units you're speaking of
yes,
get some form of autonomy.
autonomy.
And here autonomy means, does it mean financial autonomy? Does it mean governance autonomy? What does that mean?
You have to create self-government units, autonomous self-government units in
local areas.
In local areas. Let me give you an example. If you run through Kayole's Pine Road, you are going to run through a city with a huge, high density of employment along that street. And that street is richer than most urban, bigger urban areas that we are talking about.
Many towns in Kenya.
Many towns in Kenya. And it has got a huge population.
Yep.
It is still being governed as just a small
It's a street.
entity. Yes, so what does devolution brought? Devolution brought an arrangement where the cities that are in fact, Mombasa is also doing what I call urban regionalization, which you can also not contain it through a monocentric sort of governance. So a monocentric governance cannot exist where you have a polycentric structure of a city. So you need also to decentralize yourself, create units that of municipalities. I think Dar es Salaam is more or less like that, except it's corporatized.
It has Ilala,
Yes.
Temeke,
So municipalities can be created. There is legal framework. There is nothing that stops governors from creating that.
Let me contextualize.
And that is what will actually change, because you create, therefore, a governance structure where now you bring planning services closer and
you localize it.
You localize it, and you can go into a lot of detail.
And governors have been given power by the Constitution and the County Government Act.
Yes.
Let me just put it in perspective. Okay, he has spoken about an organic, polycentricism, which means the city has grown organically into those places. It has nodes. There's Westlands, there's Kayole, there is Dandora, there is Embakasi, Utawala, all those places. And when you go to Utawala, you get shocked. You're like, hey, you should be very afraid that this city can actually become unmanageable, because what's going on in Utawala is bigger than Kisumu's economy. And what is going on in Dandora, and these are places like Embakasi. 5 Embakasis combined have a population nearly 1 million. That's bigger than most counties. That's bigger than most counties of Kenya. Starehe has 210,000 people. Starehe as a sub-county. It's bigger than Eldoret City. It's bigger than Nakuru City. It's all those places. Dagoretti has 400,000 people. In the Urban Areas and Cities Act, the threshold for a place to be declared a city is 250,000 people.
So if you have 200,000 people,
you're a city. You're a city by law.
Okay, and a municipality, what population is it? 50,000.
So all those sub-counties of Nairobi qualify, much more than qualify to be municipalities.
So
in fact, more than half are cities.
Be even below boroughs.
No, and again, borough is a British term that we have to be careful.
Only applied in London.
It is only applied. It's a British term. We have to be careful. Our law provides actually for municipalities and cities. And we can. In fact, there is nothing to stop us in Nairobi if we so want to, and because it has become necessary that you decentralize Nairobi to the level where you have self-governing units, manageable units, so that all these things that you have spoken to Ndu and Latif happen in local places without necessarily having to be referred to the center. And that is feasible. Does it require any more legislation? No.
So essentially we're saying that a city like Nairobi is a little too big to be managed just from one central point.
My goodness. Absolutely.
And the law gives the governor and
the provisions
and MCAs
the opportunity
to actually.
In fact, the present governor is the luckiest governor of them all, because we are agreed that two things have happened in devolution. The political process of devolution is at 88-90%, because when you look at the county assembly, the way it functions, they are stickler for rules. The institution has evolved. They have a clerk, they have a
Speaker.
speaker, they have committees, they have standing orders. You know, the executive also has his cabinet, all those things. But beyond that, this service delivery arm is the most underdeveloped.
Yeah.
And that is where the crux of the matter is. Because lots of things need to be done. Territorial definition, management services, you know, understanding the needs of those sub-counties and so on and so forth. That territory is uncharted. Somebody needs to do some homework. It doesn't matter what county we're talking about. A lot of homework needs to be done. Have we decentralized? No. Have we devolved further? No. Are we willing? It's a question that needs to be
big
answered. Is it something that is, you know,
Doable?
no. Is it something that is mandatory? Yes. In fact, we are supposed to be saying the next phase of devolution has to be seen to be done. And we
Gentlemen.
must.
Sijui, we have another date next week.
Mimi mseme vizuri sasa.
So now we understand the history. Next week we look into the future. What should Sakaja do to run Nairobi better? Right? Because this is we start with Nairobi.
Yes.
What should and then we'll extend into Avinya Ndeti, into Olelenku, into Kimani Wamatangi.
You have to have a prototype, and then Nairobi will be the prototype.
This is it.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you very much for joining us.